Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Serena, the president of UCL Fintech Society for the upcoming academic year. I'm very excited today to introduce our fifth and final webinar for the Fintech and the New Normal webinar series that we've done. This is very exciting. We're going to be talking about data and AI and new technologies and the role they play in society, how they fit into the current pandemic. There's a lot of really interesting stuff to talk about today. So why don't we just jump right into it and introduce the very first speaker, who's someone I'm very excited to talk to. We're going to be speaking to Mr. Imam Hoque, who is the CEO and CPO of Quantexa, which is a company that uses... Oh, is he here? Hi, Imam. How are you? Do you want to introduce yourself and Quantexa a little bit?
I'm good. Yeah, sure. So we work with a whole range of organizations, from government departments to banks to large insurers, helping them to make the most out of data to tackle all the problems they may be facing. And the key aspect of making the most out of data is understanding the context that the data provides you. How is everything connected together? How does that influence what it is you're trying to do? And that really is the fundamental. So huge volumes of data to solve problems, and those problems can be anything from issues around credit risk and probability of default, a big topic for banks at the moment. It can be financial crime. It can be in the healthcare space, such as the COVID issues. And it can just be, how do we better understand and connect with our customers? So really, the data is a fundamental basis for this. And I guess, I did my master's in AI back in 1992, would you believe it, at Northwestern, when in the US, when AI wasn't really a big thing. And then you sort of don't use it for a long time. You think, well, what's all this data and AI stuff about? When's it going to become important? And then finally, it seems to have reached a complete tipping point now, where it's super accelerating and everybody's interested in what can I do with AI. And people often ask me, why did it change? What's different? And I said, well, you've got to think of it a little bit like the Industrial Revolution. When that happened, it was a massive change. But now, in the world of AI, the change is happening, but so much quicker. And why is that? It's three things have happened. Number one, data is everywhere. Companies, businesses, and people are aware of data in a way they never used to be, not just because of the internet, just generally. Number two, compute power is super available and super cheap. Anyone in their bedroom, get a credit card out, and for like $10, you can spin up a massive instance of AWS or GCP or Azure or whatever your favorite cloud hosting is, and run some really huge compute power. In the past, you had to order hardware and get all that stuff in. And then the third thing is, you imagine AI, it's kind of like people used to think of it as a brain in a bell jar. It's a bit disconnected. But now people have digital channels. So everyone interacts automatically with their bank through a digital channel. They interact with government services through digital channels. So why is it we should expect to start our journey digitally and then for it to interface to human, where it slows down to hours or days before we can achieve the outcome we want to achieve? So the digital channel has given that brain in the bell jar its sort of arms, legs, ears, and mouth. And it's those three things coming together that has allowed AI to explode and find all sorts of applications in a way that it never could before. So that's what we're organizations with.
Wow, that was a really nice overview, I think, and I hope a lot of the people watching were able to watch it and get, I suppose, a bit of a bigger, more general view on, what you do and really what the scope of data is at this point. But I guess I'll just ask you some more specific questions now, a little bit more pointed. How would you say that data is being used to in the scope of this current pandemic? Is there anything new that's happening, or are these methods we've already seen before? I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, I think, the pandemic is an interesting thing, right? It's an indication of the way things are changing in the world. If it's not the pandemic, it would have been Brexit. If it's not Brexit, it would have been the change to globalization and global supply chains. If it wasn't that, it would be climate change. So what we're facing in the connected world is things happen so much faster than we're used to. Now, the pandemic is a great example of super fast. I mean, it's like beginning of March, you've got a situation. By the end of the March, you've got a very different situation, and the government has to react super quickly. So the first step that really helped with the pandemic was just all the institutions gathering the data and at least communicating the scale of the problem, sharing exactly what was happening and how it was happening, and then starting to use statistical models to predict where it may end up. And, you know, this is probably the first time that the general public has been introduced in some detail to the concept of statistical models, right? You know, most people won't have heard of them or understand what are these models and things. And all of a sudden, the whole of our futures, am I going to go to the pub or not? And when am I going to go to the pub is being governed by this statistical model. So it's a very rapid education process that's happened there. And it has opened up people's thinking. But the question is, the other side of it is the data privacy angle and the fear and concerns about data privacy. So there have been, you know, in the past, many instances where there have been lower level data privacy questions and issues. They've always been there. I remember back in 2004-5, I was involved in the creation of something called the UK's Insurance Fraud Bureau. And we were collecting all policy and all claim data for the UK. And we had to go and see the Information Commissioner and ask if it was proportional. And back then, people weren't quite so concerned about data privacy. And they all said, well, actually, no, it is proportional because it's ensuring that our insurance policy costs don't go through the roof because they were escalating because all the fraudsters. And that was one angle. And then the second angle was, well, is it better for a computer to analyze this and come up with an answer, or for teams of people to analyze something and consider whether it was fraud or not? And actually, you know, in the cold light of day, quite often when people are analyzing situations, they'll say, oh, you know, it's this town and it might be this ethnicity involved, so we think it's fraud. And they'll jump to those terrible conclusions of stereotypes. Whereas actually computers are far more logical. Now, having said that, obviously when you're processing data, a super logical computer is a little bit like an autistic person, and it may not be conscious of some of the socially acceptable things that you can and can't infer from data. So you have to be very careful. You have to coach these models so that they are not introducing the sorts of biases that would be unacceptable in today's society. But data privacy is a really large concern and issue, but it's a balance. I mean, we've always in the UK had terrorism. And, you know, obviously the UK use a huge amount of data in counter-terrorism. But that's acceptable, right? Because it means you can go shopping. Most of you won't remember, but you could go shopping in Warrington on a Saturday morning without being concerned that your children might get blown up by a terrorist bomb. Or, you know, you can go out to a pub and not expect, you know, a big explosion to occur. And then the other use of data, obviously tax authorities have huge amounts of data because they're collecting the cash for the government. And we all are used to the fact that they know what our interest payments are from the banks and these sorts of things. So people do get used to it, but there's always a bit of a concern. And quite rightly, there has to be a balance. I mean, there was a time when there was a process called RIPA, which was all about sharing phone calls and phone information. And it was being abused by councils to check whether parents were trying to put their children in schools that weren't in their catchment area, stuff like that, which is just disproportionate. So I think care needs to be taken, but coronavirus is an interesting one because it is so disruptive. Right now, there's a debate, you know, should we just put the whole of Leicester City into lockdown or not? Now, you know, is that proportionate or not? What's it going to do to the people? Actually, how successful is that going to be? Are people going to go, well, I can't go out? What? I'm going to try and get out Leicester and go and visit family elsewhere, and then I can carry on as if I'm not in lockdown. Will that cause more spread of the problem? So, you know, we've obviously seen the concerns about big brother issues with government, track and trace, and these sorts of things. But it is a question of what is invasive use of technology and data, and what is proportionate use of technology and data. Clearly, if you were concerned that somebody knew everywhere you were at every point in time because of the mobile device you were carrying, you might not feel that's acceptable or proportional. However, if you consider the data that government does have, just think about this model. They know where everyone works, right? Tax Authority has employment records and PAYE records. We know who goes to what schools. We know where everyone lives from electoral roll. We know where all the hospitals are and the hospital staff. We actually know where a whole bunch of the cases are, some 300,000 of them. So technically, without even having mobile devices, imagine that network of data. Plot it as a network. Who lives with who in which household for electoral roll? Who works in which company and may see colleagues in that company? Which children go to which schools? Which elderly or vulnerable people live in what homes and who works in those homes? Or who shares a property with someone like that? If you know where people live and where they work, you can probably infer which public transport routes they're using. So imagine that is a network. You can literally plot the whole network of the whole country of those interactions. And then if you drop on top the cases, current live cases, you could start being far more selective and granular about lockdown. So maybe you wouldn't lock down the whole of Leicester City, but you would say it's this particular set of schools, it's these companies, and it's these public transport routes which represent the highest risk. Let's just look at that as a granular intervention rather than the whole thing. So having that sort of data, you can imagine, be very powerful, because you could plot on that network propagation, that the R number in a nursery is probably quite high, because little kids like to wipe each other's snotty noses and do whatever they do in those nurseries. Whereas somebody who's working in an office, that is a very different sort of arrangement. They can clean meeting rooms, clean desks, space desks one out, and all those sorts of things. So data can be very powerful in terms of modeling if used correctly. The question of the track and trace apps, I think it's, in fact, when I saw the list of potential topics to discuss, which was sent a while ago, it said, UK is thinking of launching this. What do you think? Well, we kind of know where that's ended up. It's tricky. Some societies are willing to accept higher levels of, and always have accepted higher levels of, quotes unquote control. They don't have to be your traditional, communist sort of territories or highly controlled territories. Even places like Singapore have always had a higher level of sort of government involvement with society. And it varies from one place to another. Even very places you consider very open, like Norway, they have reacted quite differently to the whole COVID case, and I think they've only had less than 100 deaths or something like that as a result. They're a small nation, but so data is very powerful when used correctly. It is that question, though, of how do you use it proportionally?
That's really interesting. I was actually going to bring up, I apologize for the echo. I'm not sure if it's something on my end. My apologies. But I don't seem to have earphones on hand, or I might try to find them in a moment. But I wanted to ask, as you brought up, there are societies that are more and less open to, data being kept. For instance, Germany is kind of on one extreme, where even trying to get a passport made is a whole process because the government won't allow itself to keep information on you. Yeah. So every time you have to reprove that you are actually German to get anything. Whereas then, there's countries like Korea where information in the tracking system, such as, even where people lived who had COVID, was being sent out to people around them. So there's such a discrepancy. And do you think with this difference, not only culturally, but also in terms of regulation, does that pose a serious problem, not just to, the efforts to fight COVID, but to the industries, containing companies such as yours that work in data. Does the kind of mismatch in terms of regulation around the world, is that a big problem? Is that a hindrance to you?
I wouldn't say it's a hindrance to us. I think it's every country judges its own level of data privacy. I mean, we adapt to all sorts of different ways of working. I'll give you a really interesting example. We're currently working with the EU on imagine all these little packages that you purchase that might come from China or other countries, and they come in and out of the EU. They want to track all of those packages for security reasons, because it might be the case that you don't want to be selling mushrooms on a supermarket shelf from Chernobyl or Fukushima at the moment, for example, which is one case. But there's many reasons why you need to track these packages for dual-use military goods, for other risks, and so on and so forth. In America, that data set is publicly available. It's published. Every single package, 1 billion records for the year. In the EU, even the EU within themselves, for their own internal customs purposes, can't agree to how they use all of that data for privacy purposes. In America, they published it. Anyone can download it and look at it. So, and you think, well, America's sort of, would they share all that data? Well, clearly they have. So it does vary hugely. I think, when you're doing big data related projects, like if you take the COVID impact, for instance, on banks at the moment, I was talking to a bank the other day, we're putting a system in to help them. They have given out, imagine this, 7 years worth of loans in 1 month. Now, the normal process of giving a loan to a business involves a credit risk decision officer looking at everything. You just can't do that. This is, 7 times 12, 84 times more volume in a given time. So now they want to have models to do it better. And of course, models can help, but what they have to do next is review all those loans in a year's time. So now they've got a year to get systems in to build statistical models. Now, the more data you have access to, the better. Company ownership structures, directors, who those companies transact with. The bank, because it's a commercial entity and they've lent to you, they've asked in return that you do share all that data. And that's the difference. You have a commitment there where you share the data because you're getting something back alone. Just like when you go shopping in Tesco or one of the supermarkets where you got a store card, you willingly give them access to every single thing you buy, how much alcohol you buy, what other products you buy, all of that data you are sharing willingly with those organizations in return for something. And likewise on the internet, whatever you're doing on Facebook, you're being bombarded with adverts, you are sharing a lot of data. The issue with sharing with government is the fear that government has a power that commercial organizations don't. And that is the government can put you in jail. They can maybe get something wrong, which interferes in your life in some way. However, you've got to provide a certain level of trust to the government to enable these things to happen. Otherwise, your question, different countries are doing different things. I strongly feel that those countries that are being overprotective about data are going to find themselves behind those countries who are more willing to use data. Case in point, if countries like Norway have reacted the way they have, and they're doing quite a bit with their data, and some of the other countries, they're going to get out of this COVID issue faster than other countries are. And they're going to have less draconian measures. And data, frankly, data tells you a huge amount about general illnesses, how hospitals can operate better, how health systems can be optimized, how you can learn about these things, how you can better service the public and put in facilities. Really, if you're locking down your data, you're trying to sort of fight a battle with one hand tied behind your back, which I think is a mistake. And I think people need to understand that any decisions you make need to be fact-based. They need to be based on data. Why not have a model help to inform the decision you're making? you can't always expect humans to be able to consume the data at the rate at which an AI model can consume it. And that's not to say that your AI model should be, a black box model. We really do say models should be the combination of really intelligent input from humans with data enrichment and enhancement. So rather than just a pure, I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to build a model to give out loans, okay? Bank giving out loans to commercial customers. Now, you could say, let's say we took every single bit of data from that bank for the last 5 years and build a trainer model, predictive model, whatever techniques you want to use, whether it's logistic regressions, whether it's, some deep learning algorithm. I can guarantee you the model still won't be as effective as the credit risk decision officer. And the reason being is the credit risk decision officer has been taught through an education where the education is a collective aggregation of all of the knowledge of lending since the Middle Ages across the globe for every single bank. And that is compounded into a set of learnings that the person is taught. So to expect AI to be able to purely deep learn out of data, I think is a little bit maybe overambitious, unless you happen to have as much data as Google. They have a lot of data, and there are a set of things that you can deep learn well, like the translations and so on and so forth. But in most everyday scenarios, you combine the enriched knowledge with what an expert can tell you, with what a data model can tell you. So, for instance, if you think about money launderers or fraudsters, there are so many ways in which they can launder the money that you just don't have enough nicely categorized known outcomes to train a model. But what you do have are people there who will say, well, if someone has registered 5 offshore entities and 6 companies in a very cheap property, that's a bad sign. And you say, well, why is that? Because they probably recruited someone on the internet and they've just signed up to have their name given as a director of these businesses. Now, a model would not have been able to really determine that. It's just one of too many variables. So, and another example would be if a foot passenger goes across from Calais to Dover and a truck goes across, and at the same time, multiple times, the same passenger and truck has gone across together, that's really weird. A model wouldn't pick that up because there's so many foot passengers and so many trucks. But that coincidence, an expert will tell you, that's a really bad sign. It means that truck is carrying contraband or drugs because the foot passenger is a minder. And if somebody at the other side of the channel is trying to redirect those drugs, that foot passenger will step in. And we know that. So you build that into your model. But equally, that expert hasn't got the capacity and brain power in the 30 minutes from when the truck is boarding the ferry at Calais to be able to check who owns the truck, who owns the logistics firm, what other companies have those directors ever owned in the past, how many times have contraband been seized in those trucks in those other companies in the past. So that sort of turbocharging of data expertise, you can't expect a human to do. So you bring the two together, the best input from the humans, the best input from big data analysis, and then the sort of expert deep learning, and then you get a really good model. And it tends not to be black box, it's very explainable, which is important. Transparency is critical. Everyone will want to know, why was my loan? Why did you flag me as a customer that was high risk? Why, whatever. And that's part of GDPR, it's explainability.
So can I ask a quick question? Someone actually here, goodness, so sorry about this echo. I thought my earphones would fix it, but they appear to not have done. But someone's written a comment here that's asking, you don't always have enough clearly labeled data to work with. Can't you use machine learning with unstructured data? someone's asked this question, and I wonder what your thoughts might be about the use of machine learning on unstructured data. A little bit quickly, though, because we've only got 5 minutes to go. So if you could give your thoughts on this, and also some, closing thoughts about what you think, the people watching might want to think about in the space, or what to look forward to.
Yeah, so machine learning has many components of it. Some of it is unsupervised, so you can do a lot of clustering, and that's very powerful and useful to understand how one organization is different to others and what might be an outlier. And you can certainly use a lot of machine learning on unstructured data, if you have enough unstructured data, like adverse media in the news and those sorts of things. So yes, you can use that to great success. It's all about a combination and using the right things in the right places. I think in terms of takeaways from this, I would say, firstly, always think about the input data and the context it provides you. Remember that nothing is a set of single observations. A company has directors, it has shareholders, it transacts with other companies, and that forms a network. So think about the network as an input into a model. Don't assume that it's easy to get all your data perfectly organized. You also have the issue of internal data sources, external data sources. Unfortunately, we don't all have labels or numbers. So you have to match Imam Hoque, 28th of the 7th, 1966, with Imam al-Haq, 28th of the 1st, 1966. Are they the same or not? So you've got to do that data quality cleanup. So these are all things that you need to get as input to your model. Then once you've got your model, then you have to worry about, how do I operationalize it? How do I help augment what a human's doing or a user's doing with my model? How do I point them at where the risk or opportunity is? How do they interact with the model? How does the model update itself? So too often when people think about big data and they think about models, they think about it as a sort of isolated mathematical thing, as opposed to the end-to-end operational system, from the data, how you join it, how you prepare it, how many other sources of data can you use, to what outcome are you trying to achieve. And I think, the UK government, certainly in the work that's done around coronavirus, maybe was hoping that this track and trace thing would be the end all and be all, and then they get it quite right, and now they're sort of, so, you've got to take a holistic view to these things and think about lots of different approaches. If if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. But don't just keep trying the same thing. Right? Try other things. And that's what it's about in the world of big data analytics and modeling. You've got to bring in different data sets. You've got to prepare the data in different ways. You've got to have people interacting with the data in a different way to get the outcomes that you want.
As nice of a roundup as that was, it does seem like we do have a little bit more time than expected. So it would be great, actually, that you brought it up. If you could talk a little bit about what you think went wrong with the UK tracing system versus, the more successful ones we might see in the East, like Singapore that you mentioned, or South Korea.
Yeah, it's hard to say about what has worked well and what we didn't do right. I think to get something like this sort of track and trace app thing working, you actually need quite a lot of discipline there's a few things you need. You need an environment where people are willing to share quite a bit of their data. Then you need a good amount of discipline and self adoption, which doesn't come that easily if your population is one that's not normally used to sort of, being told what to do and just accepting it and getting on with it. There's no chewing gum on the streets in Singapore. It's not quite the same way in London, unfortunately, despite people telling you don't spit chewing gum on the floor. So I think with these things, it was, I think they were hoping it would work the same, but actually the characteristics of that operational system were different. And that's a bit of the challenge there.
And you mentioned, you mentioned that there's a difference, very much there is a difference between Singapore streets and London streets, and that's true. And you also mentioned earlier that Norway's done a very good job. But at the time when I researched, this may have changed now, but it looked like only 1 in 5 Norwegians were actually on the contact tracing app. So do you think that Norway managed to somehow, use other methods, or is there
They
just...
did a few things a little differently.
Mhm.
Yeah, they combined the capability. So Norway has a single major telecoms operator, Telenor. And Telenor were able to mobilize very quickly, because they've been doing a lot of work with their data, to see how you can use data in a fully anonymized way. And I think by combining that with the app, they were able to fill in a lot of the blanks and get more value out of it as a complete sort of operation and system. So they were able to, on an aggregate level, without getting down to the granular who's doing exactly what, see general flows of where movements were happening and people were moving around and things like that. So, slightly different approach.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think you said a lot of really insightful things, and hopefully the people watching live and also the people who will watch this after it's been put up will learn a lot. I personally thought it was really interesting. So hopefully at UCL FinTech, we'll be able to see more of you for the upcoming year and moving forwards. Thank you so much, Imam Hoque, for being with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. So that's been Imam Hoque, the COO and CPO of Quantexa. He said a lot of interesting things, but I'm also very excited for our upcoming speaker, who will definitely also have a lot of interesting things to say, and I think a lot of you will be looking forward to this one as well. So we've got Diane Barry, who is a senior manager in Bain & Company's Advanced Analytics Group. So she'll tell us a little bit more about herself and what she does. I don't think I'll need to explain too much about what Bain & Company is, but she'll give us some background anyway. Hi, Diane. How are you doing? Welcome.
Good, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me today. I really appreciate the invite and the time to talk here as well.
We're really glad to be able to have you, because I'm sure you have a lot of insightful things to say, and students are definitely interested in learning a lot about, what Bain does and how it works. So along those lines, how would you describe your role at Bain, and how exactly does Bain Advanced Analytics fit into Bain as a bigger picture, so to speak?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So as you've introduced me, my title is I'm a senior manager in data science. I'm part of Bain's Advanced Analytics Delivery Group. Our Advanced Analytics team is an integrated, multidisciplinary team. We consist of data scientists, data engineers, marketing scientists, engineers, and operations research experts as well. I do plan to post some links on my LinkedIn page as well. So just to highlight that we are part of Vector, which is Bain's actual integrated platform for all of the digital capabilities that we have here. As I mentioned, we are a delivery team for advanced analytics, so we can act as expert advisors to our clients and leadership. We can be part of the integrated team with our consultants and our clients' data scientists, and to deliver some really cool advanced analytics solutions to solve their problems. So some sort of use cases that I've personally been involved in at Bain on financial services have been building out recommendation engines for insurance companies so they are able to really meet their clients' needs, because often with insurance companies, they really care about actually meeting their clients' needs, just not offering another product as such. And also doing things around really optimizing discounts towards their clients as well. So it's a space where obviously you want to offer something so people will stay with you, but also not too much, so you're not giving away too much money. And those are a couple of the use cases that I've worked on for financial services.
It really seems like advanced analytics is wearing quite a lot of hats all at once.
Yeah, it does. It truly does, honestly, because I think it's the space in which it's grown is incredible as well. And I mean, but fundamentally, what we're trying to do at Bain is solve business problems.
Mm-hmm. And If you've given a use case here, you've given a couple use cases, including the insurance one. Would you say that that's a sector that, I mean, it seems like it would be, right? Because they go through huge amounts of data and they get huge amounts of data. So that might be a sector that's going to particularly be in a good position to take advantage of this boom in data and data analytics and data science. Can you think of any others that might be interesting?
Yeah, just on that particular comment. So financial services, I mean, obviously for regulatory reasons, have always had like a large component of analytics people, whether that be actuaries or business insights people. So, I think from surveys, typically they run at around 3 or 4% of actually their overall workforce being advanced analytics people that play in that space. Other industries that will really and are really benefiting from big data and automation. I think there's a lot in the service industry. I think there's been a number of reports that have come out there that will have quite a big impact in terms of automation. I mean, obviously the challenge with that in terms of workforces such as the US, like 3/4 of the workforce is tied up into service. So that will obviously come at quite a big play and have quite a significant impact there. Particular industries in themselves are things like retail, for example. I mean, I think it's fair to say with COVID that a lot of us have, even if we didn't buy online, we certainly are now buying online because it's much easier to do. And certainly for organizations, they can really utilize that data. But even when you think of the physical space, like what Amazon Go has done, for example, in that space where they've actually reduced down, they've taken away the cashiers, right? They've just got barriers. They've got sensors and and monitors to see actually how the customers are shopping in store and getting real insight there, which you would even struggle to do with a loyalty card system. Is kind of amazing as well. Other areas, I think this one probably won't come as a big surprise, but it'll be things like transport and logistics, so especially with driverless AI, in particular with haulage. And this isn't just road haulage, this is also, say, railway haulage. We're all very used to in London being on the DLR, which does or doesn't necessarily have a driver, and that is also part of automation, right? I think there's a lot of railroads that are going through probably significant upgrade to reduce down the amount of drivers they have in place. There will always be some need for safety checks, so I think automation will always play a part against human labor, and there'll be that augmentation that will take place. But that is an industry where there will be a significant impact from automation as well. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it evolves, because I don't think it will be a direct replacement. I think it will be very much an augmentation. We've all got to benefit from it to a large degree, so it will need to work for the broader society as well.
I think also it's an interesting point that you bring up, because obviously we've all considered, to what extent automation is going to have an impact on employment. And a lot of the people watching are students. But then at the same time, companies and governments are spending, billions on upskilling workforces, on the lack of talent for certain fields rather than others. Do you think that, there's someone who's failing? Is it the institutions? Is it the governments? Is it the companies? What's going wrong that we're, kind of having an imbalance of who we need and where we need them? And do you think that can be fixed?
Yeah, no, and I think it is being fixed. I mean, Bain just actually did a really recent survey on this in terms of closing the gap with AI talent. So I think in terms of what we saw is that for data science talent, we think that gap's going to be broadly closed within the next couple of years, because university institutes have turned it around. They're producing a lot more people in the STEM subjects that can focus and develop out their skills in this place. There's a lot of organizations are developing their own internal training programs and leveraging outsourced providers to do that. So that's also taking place. So I think in terms of the actual data science talent itself, that gap will be closed. And actually, potentially, it's also an area that might see a bit of a downturn. There is some debate that it could see a bit of a downturn with COVID as well, because there's been a lot of AI projects that haven't actually necessarily achieved the expected return on investment that organizations have put into it. And depending on how they've got those teams of data scientists structured, it might be relatively easy for them to reduce workforce there. I think going back to that survey or that piece of research that I mentioned, areas that we see the biggest pain points in terms of unmet demand is actually data architects and data engineers. So that's actually being able to bring in the data to the organization infrastructure and then surface it in such a way that it can actually be used, that adheres to all the regulations that are actually out there as well, but also so that it can actually add real value to the organization and its customers as well. So and what's interesting is these roles have been fairly traditional, although the speed of which data is coming in and the amount of data that's coming in has changed. But these roles have certainly been around there for a fairly long time as well, although the technology and tools that are being used now has changed.
Yes, I've been reading about that recently as well, how, you know, the change in technology has suddenly allowed so much to bloom, and kind of it seems like regulation is also having to sprint to keep up with this rapid pace. Just like you mentioned just now, you know, it's important to have people who are able to keep on top of the ever-changing regulation. And as I was mentioning with the previous speaker, that regulation isn't always uniform throughout even close regions like Europe, or, you know, obviously on the global scale, there are different levels happening. Do you think that, you know, regulation is keeping up well and helping the innovation, or do you think that regulation as it stands in the UK, for instance, or in general, do you think that there's space for them to improve on, you know, the pace at which they regulate or the methods?
Yeah, you know, and I think it does depend a little bit on your ideology. I'm going to be entirely transparent in where you come from. I personally think regulation has its place to play in the schemes of things. To me, government regulation on data privacy is actually closely linked to competition and consumer rights. And so to some extent, again, I realize this is more of my opinion rather than perhaps my firm's opinion, of which I don't think they have a particular opinion, we just work with what we have, is that regardless of the size of a company, everyone needs to comply with GDPR and consumer rights. And again, I think it's really difficult to have one without the other. And like I said, I see it about people being or organizations being on the same level playing field. So I actually think it can help innovation. So it means that a new entrant to a particular market can have a place to play, because everyone's complying with the same set of rules. So I do think it's really important from that aspect. I do think it's really important to the general public that their data is secure. I mean, I care when I'm hacked. I don't want my identity hacked and sold off to the lowest bidder. And I mean, part of GDPR, for example, those regulations were out there already. What GDPR did to a large extent is actually make it sufficiently punitive enough for organizations to actually now really care about the fact that they do need to enforce security and they do need to enforce privacy. Because honestly, without there being a sufficient motivation, there is so much demand on organizations' investments. You need to make it higher on the priority list to ensure that it is actually taking place and people are following the rules and regulations. And that can be really difficult if an organization is serving up marketing from advertisers, which accounts for 98% of their profit, to actually be sufficiently motivated enough to do something in the space of data regulation and privacy as well. So that said, I think there's still a huge and tremendous amount that can be done with data. I mean, our work certainly has only increased with time. It's not that it suddenly stopped with GDPR. I do think there is this concept of, has data now become toxic because organizations are so afraid of it? There's a lot that needs to take place in terms of data governance within an industry and within an organization, and it's not, unfortunately, the most exciting topic, but it is something that organizations really do need to address, and that's basically setting up the overarching principle and then putting the process and the procedures in place, making sure that you've got the right technology that can actually go through fairly seamlessly. Because what an organization wants to really ideally avoid is for that individual data scientist to have an opinion on whether they should or shouldn't be using that data, because two people will take a very different opinion on it. So it does really need to be enforced right from the get-go and set up so you don't get those elements of discretion.
You mentioned earlier, which I think is interesting, that regulation ties in really closely with consumer rights. And I think that's a really important point to pick up on, because there's, I think for a lot of people, this narrative that data is, is this thing that's just everywhere and we have absolutely no control over where it goes. And people are kind of fearful, I suppose, because they don't understand what's happening to their data. And the biggest times we hear about it in the news are, scandals where it's being misused or abused.
Yeah.
Is there something we can do to change that narrative in people's minds? Because obviously there's so much data can do to move us forward as a society. What do you think can happen to change people's sensibilities? And is there anything companies can do to make people feel more comfortable about their data?
Well, I do think companies do need to face up to the scandals that have been out there, because, there've been scandals often for very good reasons. We're living in a world at the moment where advertisers, for example, are threatening, or have, and some are still are, threatening to boycott Facebook because of the way that effectively they're using our data to market certain products to us and then place that by fairly contentious content of which, their customers don't want. So I do think I think the organizations do need to face up to that. In terms of, so it will get there. I think there's also aspects that organizations need to improve. And I think it needs to be done in a way that they can improve visibility about how individuals' data are being used. I mean, we all get given a large and long list of T's and C's when we sign up to a service provider. I think as individuals, we definitely need to educate ourselves. If we're not paying for a service, we are paying through it through our attention, and we just need to realize that. And that's fine if that's the trade-off we're willing to make. And often it's worth it because of the convenience and the connectivity that's there. But I do think as individuals and as a society at large, we need to realize that marketing works, and we need to educate ourselves around some of the services that we are using there as well, that despite being free, we are paying for it. I think organizations need to ensure that they are securing our data, that they are being ethical about how they're doing it as well, because the law is there, but it's not a binary thing. Otherwise, the law profession wouldn't exist. So I think there does need to be actually a high level of ethics applied to it in terms of how organizations are applying and using the data too, and just to be transparent with their end customer base. I feel like as time moves on, people are fine about organizations using their data. There's been a number of different surveys that have done that said, people are quite fearful about their data being misused, but yet at the same time, we are using more and more online services than ever before. So I think it's just a matter of the fact that we just need to show a certain level of maturity as individuals, but also companies need to show a certain level of maturity, as well as the ethics they apply to using data.
Yeah, so it'll be important to educate consumers on, about their data as well and the rights they have. And you mentioned earlier as well that actually there are companies that are fearful of data, and this would also come to, I guess we were talking about GDPR earlier, and the there were many companies in the UK as well as just in general who struggled to actually, adapt and apply this by the deadline. It had to be pushed, right? And I imagine that at a company like Bain, you would get the chance to see a lot of, the industry standard and how companies might be struggling with this. Do you think that, do a lot of companies come, or are there a lot of use cases where actually companies aren't wondering about how best to apply data, but they're just seeking to understand it at all? Or is that a thing? Do you feel the industries are ready?
I feel that industries have certainly got a lot more ready, and I think part of that is just the technology that's being put in place that has developed over time to allow the fact that you've got full visibility over, data as it moves through the system as well. I actually, there has been a number of scandals, but also I think actually a lot of the organisations are really doing a great job in terms of managing and dealing with data as well. I definitely think there's a lot of room for improvement. And as long as they've got the right data governance set up and they've got the right working style to deal with that, and typically nowadays when you're working with data, companies tend to opt for an agile way of working, so you've got a real multidisciplinary team there. You've got the people that understand the data and know what you can and can't do with it. So if you are really producing quite an innovative product, that can really help that process and make it fast as well. I think there's a lot of spaces where companies still struggle with it because it is a psychological shift, right? I think what we're going to see perhaps in the next 10, 20 years is this real psychological shift for organizations to move to a data-driven approach, to really take on board the data and the insights that are actually out there today and really embed that into their process. But I think it is addressed. I think it has to be addressed. I mean, organizations are realizing that often the innovators in that space are really taking advantage of that. So it is happening, and it is going to keep on happening as well.
Yeah, it's very much, it seems like a wave that either you go with it or you get caught up in it. And earlier I asked, what are the sectors that are really well positioned to take advantage of this? But I guess on the flip side, it would also be interesting to hear, are there any sectors that you feel are actually getting caught up in the wave and are kind of lagging behind slightly?
Well, so I would say it's not necessarily that. I mean, so there's a lagging behind because they don't necessarily face the market demand or the competition to do so. I mean, when I sat back and thought of this and did a little bit of research, so one industry that came up was around energy generators, so the electrical, say, power generators, for example. And I certainly know from our own experience when working with, say, energy generators, so this could be a hydroelectrical plant, for example, because of the diversity of the different technologies and machinery that they've got in place and the age of the machinery, because bearing in mind, to create something like a hydro plant, it's like a long project. It takes many years to realize. You're not just going to replace a particular piece of equipment because it might be a few years old. They're often there for many years. Nevertheless, we've still had very successful advanced analytics use cases. Often it's not predictive maintenance per se because it tends to be a few steps before that, so it's more condition-based maintenance. A lot of that's about understanding what's taking place already in terms of the maintenance program. It's about speed to insights more often than not, and that could be using things like natural language processing to look at maintenance logs to understand what topics are typically coming up and what can be improved in that process. So even in these sort of more traditional industries, you are still getting some adoption of advanced analytics and AI. It's just typically taking place at a slower pace, again, because of the competitive demand, but also just in terms of the type of equipment they're typically dealing with as well. And then the use cases tend to be a little bit more one-off. It will change over time, but for now, that is what we have seen.
Someone here has asked a question that I think is quite interesting, and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts about it. But they've asked about the issue of bias when it comes to creating models to process a lot of data. How do you deal with biases that either come naturally out of a machine kind of just understanding already existing inequalities, or versus, bias that might come in from the perspective of the person who created the model? Is there a way to address that?
Yeah, no, and it's something that I've been really thinking about a lot. So there's a lot certainly within AI that's gone on around explainable AI. So this is developing additional models on top of the models that you've created, so you can really see the key features or variables that have gone into actually bringing in a certain decision, for example. There's a lot of work that's gone on, but I think there's also a fundamental question about what if that training data set actually had a bunch of decisions behind it that were fundamentally biased. So it doesn't matter if you take out really obvious variables such as gender, ethnicity, income, where someone lives, for example. They are all broadly proxies to that inherent bias that might have made that initial decision, essentially. So one way that I think companies can really resolve this is obviously really bring in ethical viewpoints about whether that is true or not. So really be honest with themselves about that place. But I think the other way is through test and learning as well. Like, you are not just tied to the data set you've collected. You can also do a lot of innovation about actually building out data sets and testing new different ways that you're offering products, for example, or making decisions, and collect feedback that way. So you can really generate additional insight and data from that won't be affected by past bias as well. But it's a huge area for AI because so much of it depends on historical data in terms of training. So, and it's only going to become more and more important as well. Yeah, and I would say, especially in light of UCL's legacy around the statistics department, of which I am alumni too.
Are you really? Oh, I'm maths. So close, but so far. I suppose actually that's a really great segue. So since a lot of the people watching are going to be students and they're going to be, starting their careers soon, do you think there's any advice you might want to give them about, do they want to go into something like analytics within Bain, or do they want to go into a startup? Or do you have any advice or thoughts that you might want to share to young people?
No, well, I think Bain is an awesome company. I've been with Bain now since 2014, and I think the things that really interested me and attracted me to Bain was the variety of use cases and the industries that we would work across. I think also because we're a management consultancy company, we're really focused on adding value. Like, we're not just doing something for the sake of doing it. We've got a very high reach in terms of the senior executives that we work with. So, the value that we can really bring to organizations is incredible. And we also really get that high stakeholder engagement as well. I think the trade-off with the startup, and I'm going to be entirely honest, I come from New Zealand. I did my undergrad in New Zealand, and I worked for, initially I worked in software engineering, and I worked for a bespoke software house there. One benefit of startups is that you do get to go across many different fields. Like, you could do a bit of data engineering, you could do a bit of data science, you could do DevOps. In a startup environment, there is just a necessity to some extent to be the jack of all trades, just because, there's not necessarily the other people there to do that. So you do get across the whole board. It depends. I think it depends on what you're interested in. If there's an industry that you have a particular passion about. I'm a person that went back to university. So as I mentioned, I worked for a number of years in software engineering, and then I actually went back to university. So I went back to UCL, where I did my MSc in statistics and then a PhD in statistics while working for UCL. So I also believe that whatever you do with your undergrad, you're not stuck with that. There's a lot of other opportunities that you can get into as well. And it's really about what interests you, what's your passion, what's going to get you up in the morning, and realizing there comes a time that maybe that's still not the case, but you can move into something else and develop those skills as well, because we are in a world where you might have started out in a career 40 years ago, but that career no longer exists. So you've got to be able to adapt and develop this ongoing learning mentality too.
And I'm sure a lot of people are definitely going to be relieved to hear that they're not tied down forever with whatever they do now. Is it very, very different? Like, we learned a bit about advanced analytics and what kind of the group does, but in your day-to-day, are there very large differences between your work as a software engineer versus your work now?
Not to be honest, I mean, I'm not coding as much as I would like. I think I am an old tech head, so I still like to dabble with coding. So obviously my roles become more senior. I would say, yeah, I mean, I work for a different type of organization now. I think there's definitely a different level of engagement in terms of the clients that I work with. But I definitely think there's a large intersection. And certainly as we're building out analytic solutions that are going to be left behind at the client, whether that's an a minimal viable product or a production system, having that software engineering background really, really helps to understand actually what are the barriers that we need to go through in terms of tech barriers, but also stakeholder barriers to ensure that that product's delivered and works with our clients, even if that is, say, a service as a software solution. So I think, yeah, my former life, there's a large happy intersection in that, which means I get the best parts of both worlds to some degree.
And it seems, I'm sorry to pull you over, but into some sort of extra time, but I'm kind of curious. Do you think that something like graduate studies in statistics or something like graduate studies in data science, which is something I know a lot of people are interested in, or a lot of our members are currently doing even, do you think that that's more valuable than doing undergrad and going straight into it? Or do you think you bring some experience from undergrad and then now what you're doing, you can still pull from some of the transferable skills?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I would say a lot of organizations are looking for a minimum of a master's in something applied math related, whether that be statistics or data science or physics or computer science with a focus on machine learning. I think, there is enough organizations to justify that graduate degree. The nice thing is with the UK, it's a one-year course. In a lot of other countries, it's a 2-year course, so it's actually quite a significant undertaking. I think some of the things that a master's really brings you that lends itself to the workplace is actually the speed of which you need to learn this material as well, especially if you haven't done an undergrad in a closely related subject. That is actually quite incredible. I mean, I've had friends comment to me, and I can speak to this myself, is that actually often the master's is more difficult than, say, doing a PhD, just because you've got so much material that you need to cover in that short period of time and actually deliver on, that it really helps you in terms of that transition towards the workplace. Also, they do shape the programs. Typically, for masters, there'll be more advanced topics in certain areas. You'll get to go deeper into a particular area that you like through your MSc project, and that could be something that is placed in industry, or it could be nutting out a methodology problem. I still think there's a lot of value in a master's program. The question on PhD, on the other hand, I think if you look at research, perhaps, and there was an Economist piece of The Economist, the magazine, did a research. I think it's probably about 10 years old there, and it said, financially it wasn't worth it. That said, it's incredibly fun. You get to go really deep, and I think a lot of it is what you personally want to do. What's your passion and what's behind that?
Mm. And do you think, did you come into Bain in 2014 with the PhD?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, that's right.
And do you think doing it informed like what kind of career you might have been looking into?
Yeah, I knew that having done software, I liked software. And I predominantly did work in the financial industry as well. Then when I did my PhD, I did it at Institute of Child Health. So I started it in the 2000s, and it was around the time the explosion of genetic data. You had the whole genome that had just been decoded in the beginning 2000s. So my data matter was actually working on longitudinal birth cohort data that had this very rich history of lifestyle and health markers, and also biomarkers and genetic data. So for me, it was totally foreign. I mean, I had done applied math. I had all the way through my schooling. I'd done physics at my final year at school. I hadn't touched biology until at all. I left that at the age of 15. But this was incredibly exciting to work in an area that was having so much impact and so much value in terms of the research that was out there as well. I think what it made me realize at the end of that journey is that I still liked industry. But that's me. I like industry. I like solving business problems. But yeah, that's what it made me realize, that I sort of didn't want to stay in academia because I didn't want to get too niche. And that's also why I made the choice about going into Bain as well. I like being a generalist to some degree, although we are now moving into a world of experts as well.
That's definitely true. And thank you so much for sharing some of your insight as I think what a lot of people would consider an expert. So thank you so much, Diane. Hopefully we'll hear from you again as a double UCL alumni. So it'll be great to have you back if you're happy to have us back. Thank you so much for being here.
No, and thank you again. It's been a really fun conversation, really interesting topics as well.
Thank you. We definitely do our best. All right. So that was Diane Berry, a senior manager at Bain & Company. Now we're going to dive right into our next speaker, who I'm really excited to introduce. So this is Gigi Vela. So he is the head of data science at Quantexa, which is a company that he'll introduce for us, I'm sure much better than I could, but was acquired by McKinsey in 2015 and originally had their start working with Formula One. So that's quite something. Let's hear it from him himself. Hello, Didier. How are you? Welcome.
Hello. Good evening. So thank you so much for your invite. Very excited to be here.
Oh, we're super excited to have you. So if you could introduce yourself quickly and Quantexa for the people who might not know it too well yet.
Okay. So I'm Gigi Vela. I'm the global head of data science at Quantexa. I joined Quantexa a few months after the acquisition of McKinsey. And essentially, at the time, we was just 7. And now we are more than 160 data scientists globally across different offices on different continents. So what is it, Quantexa? Quantexa is one of the analytics arm of McKinsey. So we have the privilege to work with McKinsey hand to hand in order to deliver value for the benefit of our client. More importantly, I will say we have the benefit to deliver impact for our client, but as well, we have the privilege to have access to very great training. And probably for our audience, I would like to remind the dual objective of Quantexa and McKinsey here. It is number one, deliver impact for our client. We want to be sure that we improve process, help our clients to handle any kind of situations. And the number two, knowing the fact that the audience is almost student. The second objective, a dual objective, it is to grow people. And for that, we have access to the training of McKinsey, and as well, we invest heavily on our data scientists. For example, we give access to 2 academic conferences a year. So the combination of McKinsey training, academic, and technical excellence, it is great for the benefit of data scientists. And I believe that I have the privilege and the honor to work with 160 talented data scientists worldwide.
And I'm sure a lot of the people watching are aspiring, as you brought up, data scientists and innovators of the future. So for some of those who might want to know exactly from your perspective how you perceive some of these bigger buzzwords, in your mind, how would you define AI, and what value do you think it currently is adding or it could potentially add?
So indeed, artificial intelligence, data science, it's a buzzword. But in a nutshell, I would like to simplify this. So essentially, artificial intelligence is the process to understand the previous behavior, previous pattern, previous information, to structure them in order to make decisions. So this is very, very high level. And for me, there is different aspect here. I do not want that our audience think artificial intelligence, it's very cold. Not at all. I really believe in between the combination of, yes, this kind of new technology from a modeling perspective, from a computing perspective, but as well, the importance of a relationship with the human. Human needs to be at the center of the decisions. And artificial intelligence, it's another tool on the decision process. So I see artificial intelligence just like a subsection of a concept that we love at Quantum Black, and it is augmented intelligence. We want to combine artificial intelligence plus human expertise, human judgment, in order ultimately to make better decisions.
I think that was a great nutshell to put it in. Hopefully that helped a lot of the people watching now or who might be watching. So let's move to another fun buzzword that we all love, is data science and big data. So how would you put those in perspective? From your point of view, what is it, and what's good about it? Why is it adding value to us?
Okay, as you said, it's another buzzy word, and I would like to make some differentiation between these different words. So big data, it is something that's happened, I will say, almost in 2014 to 13, 12, on this range, and it was more a technological word. Let me explain a little bit. And if you don't mind, I would like to use the concept of the pyramid of Maslow. So we need to do, in order to do data science, and I will explain later on, artificial intelligence, like I just said, what we want to do it is to have the foundation, the technological foundation from a computing perspective, from a data itself. We want to be sure we have this kind of platform. And then, as another layer of a pyramid of Maslow, if I may say that, we want to use this data in order to address specific questions using this kind of technique. So this is where I think it's very important to make, I would say, a differentiation between technology and data science and artificial intelligence. For me, data science and artificial intelligence are dedicated and focused on value. Big data, I would say, resonate more on the technological side of it. But we need to be careful. As a leader on any kind of organization, what is important? It is value. And we need to have a two combination between technology and as well data science in order to be successful.
And so you mentioned that as a leader, it's important to be looking for value for your business. And hopefully that's kind of the name of the game for a lot of businesses. So what do you think is hindering the adoption of these technologies for the businesses that aren't able to adopt or don't see the relevance in it yet?
So I would say on this instance, we should think right now in the middle of the pandemic, or at least at the end of the pandemic, hopefully. I would like to frankly to ask you two questions, two examples. So Serena, if you don't mind, do you like to take transportation at the moment? Do you like to go to the train?
I think I'll avoid it if I can.
Yeah. Another quick questions. Do you use Note to make any kind of any kind of transactions when you do your shopping or you go to the supermarket?
I think it's probably been months since I have.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm the same. So just on this kind of situation with the pandemic, I think we can say that the behavior of everyone changed. And I believe will stay or will become an hybrid. What is interesting here, it is we need to realize, acknowledge that the last almost 5 weeks or 6 weeks of pandemic changed dramatically the behavior of everyone in the society. So there is no question, no barrier at the moment for artificial intelligence. And the simple is the following. It is the digitalization of the economy, not only, I will say, from the behavior of the citizen and consumer, is definitely toward digitalization, but as well, everything lead to this new activity. So yes, there is no barrier. And interestingly enough, during the last 2 months, we saw an increase of acceptance of this digitalization and as well the use of artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow. So actually, we've had previous speakers mention that this pandemic is catalyzing in a lot of ways the adoption of technologies where previously it was kind of like, oh, we might, but we might not. And now it's like, this is what there is. So it's interesting to hear that from this perspective as well. So it'd be interesting now as well, since there is a lot more adoption, to think a little bit about what the implications of wider adoption of AI and big data might be, from an ethical perspective and from a social perspective as well. So a lot of people, I brought up in previous sessions, and somebody asked a question, which I think very much we can just put up here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but they're wondering, I know you've written an article about this, and it would be great if you could talk a little bit about that for the people viewing right now, about the biases inherent to models built, whether that comes from the bias of the person building the model, or whether that comes from, reflecting injustices already in the data. What your thoughts are on bias in models.
Okay, so that's a very good question. So thank you so much, Farid, to raise this question in the middle of all the current event, what's happened around the world. So the positioning for us is very important. First of all, at Quantum Black, we believe that this question are critical, and we develop a lot of energy, and we deployed as well a lot of resources to tackle these questions. And the way that we view the situation, in fact, it is, and my answer will be technical and consciously technical, because I want to give a technical perspective to this question. So we see the world in 3 stages, actually. So once we receive the data as a data scientist, we want to be able to measure the potential bias on the data. We want to understand what's the underlying structure. Do we have a bias? And by the way, just by asking this question, it's a difficult one, because there is so many measures of bias. It can be made at the individual level. It can be done at the subpopulation level. So even though, from a mathematical standpoint, it's quite complicated, but it's important to measure the different and to assess, if you want, the different directions that is itself contained in the data. And I will say the second step, it is once you construct a model, you want to understand what are the key drivers of the model. Are they related to sensitive attributes, such as the race and the gender? And finally, once you realize that there is a lot of impact within the sensitive attribute, what you want to do is to correct. And there is a lot of technique to correct. And we are very excited about this kind of new approach to correct bias. But in a nutshell, I hope that I answer this question here. There is no silver bullet. It's very complicated to measure or to select the adequate measure, because we have so many. But more importantly, I believe that the overall self-awareness of a data scientist, and not only. So it's a self-awareness of the machine learning, of the data scientist, of the legal counsel, and eventually of the CEO that will allow us to go forward on this matter. So again, Quantum Black invests a lot. We take seriously this matter, and I'm very pleased to inform you as well that we publish on this aspect. So very, very critical, in particular in this moment, but it was, it is, and it will be.
And like you mentioned, it's so important for business leaders to stay on top of this. And as a McKinsey company, I'm sure you have a lot of exposure to leaders in different types of businesses and in different fields. Do you feel companies are taking the ethics of data seriously enough, or do you think something can be done to push them to take it a little bit more seriously still?
So with this pandemic, I think that everyone at the C-level, is aware about this kind of situations, because the more and more we have digitization, the more and more this kind of question will remain and will emerge constantly. So on this specific matter, yes, the leaders are aware. The question is we help and support every organization to implement holistic framework, because as I said, it's not only the data scientist as well that is important. The fact, another good example, that we have diverse team that handle this kind of bias have a positive impact of the outcome, because the diversity, the richness of perspective and talent will provide a better answer. So very, very briefly, the leader of today knows we need to support, we need to help them, and this is what Quantum Black is doing, and our data scientists doing in a daily basis, for the benefit not only of the organization, the reputation of the organization, but as well, ultimately, the benefit of a society.
And you mentioned just now that it's a team that, as a collective, a Quantum Black, you have to work for. So I imagine the talent and the people making up Quantum Black are crucial to helping you deliver your mission and carry out your mission. And I wonder, in terms of talent, if you could say a quick word, because we heard earlier from Diane at Bain that talent in her mind is really important. And she had some thoughts as to the skills gap versus the automation of certain jobs. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on that.
So I would like to focus a little bit on the gap. And but by the way, just to be clear, are we talking about the gap at the society level, or we talk about at the organizational level?
Well, I suppose either would be interesting, but I was referring more to the fact that a lot of companies seem to be lacking the talent that they want to fill the roles that they need. But then there's also people concerned about how to upskill themselves to find, this kind of job.
Okay, so I will say there is two questions here. So let's think macro, and then let's do this at the micro individual level. So at the macro level, I think that school, university, every actor of the education system in this country and globally should be involved. So the school, we should provide a minimum training in artificial intelligence and eventually programming. School and the university need to be as well robust. Regardless if you do a PhD in philosophy, it's good to know the basics of artificial intelligence and as well a minimum of coding. The government needs to play a key role here, and I believe that there is fantastic agency in this government. For example, the chair for data analytics do AI barometer on a monthly basis, and this is a very good sign that we are on the top of the curve, I would say. Consulting company like Quantum Black, we provide guidance as well to the overall actor. We are massively involved supporting different initiatives by training young students, and we are active member of a Girl Code First initiative. Big giant need as well to provide visibility of a need. So I will say in a nutshell, on the macro level, every actor need to be involved in order to address the shortage of skills in AI and computing. So if you don't mind, I will go to the second question at the micro level, at the individual level. I think at the moment, we have a privilege in some extent to have access to so many knowledge, so many training, so many courses from home. And this is almost the responsibility of everyone to leverage this opportunity despite these circumstances. So if you see different organizations that provide training online, you can learn so many things online. You can learn data science, you can learn programming, you can learn boxing. I took recently an online boxing training to give you just a flavor of the different opportunity. But ultimately, that's the responsibility of the individual that needs to be fully integrated on the macro approach, where every big actor have an act to play.
And this is going to move a little bit away, but somebody here has asked a question, if you're happy to answer it, in the comments.
Please fly away.
Where they asked about the difference between, okay, I'll just put it up right here and everyone can read it together. But he's basically asked about whether you feel that the UK is too private, whether British people are too private with their data versus this person's experience in India, where data privacy didn't seem to be as important. And they followed this up, I won't put it up, but they followed this up by asking, do you think that this protectiveness is slowing down progress, or do you think they're right to be wary?
Okay, this is probably a sociological question. And if you don't mind, I would like to reshift this question from a data science perspective. Mm-hmm. And essentially, from a technical standpoint, what is important for us is this transparency. I'm not a legislator, but what is important is to provide transparency and explainability to everyone in the society. Mm-hmm. We want to know that why, for example, decision of credit, we are in the Fintech society, why your decision of credit limit have been increased or not, why you have access to a loan or not. So I will reshift, if you want, these sociological questions with a more a transparency and explainability topic. And this is where we invest a lot of energy, a lot of resources on our side in Quantum Black with our R&D and QB Lab team. We want to support our clients to make decisions that they are transparent, that easy to explain, and that easy to communicate it to the individual.
Thank you for your answer. I think that's probably really interesting, and I hope that, Ethan, that answered your question. Sorry, I appear to be having some connectivity problems. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. But yeah, thank you, Ethan, for your question. And if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the comments and we'll try to answer the ones that we can. But moving on, relating to the institutions. So this is more about what institutions are doing in your perspective on institution right now. But, we've been talking earlier about contact tracing and using that to, fight the pandemic. Do you feel that institutions are just now catching on to the applicability of, data in this way? And do you think this is like a lasting change? Or do you think institutions have been using data this way and we're just now coming to find out about it? What are your thoughts, I suppose?
So for me, as I said, when I introduced the concept of augmented intelligence and as well combined with the exponential factor of the pandemic, the data will become critical to make any kind of decision. And the answer is yes, we're going toward a world fully digitalized and driven by data process. And I would like to refer on this kind of question on a recent paper have been published by McKinsey. And by the way, it's accessible to everyone. So I encourage everyone, the audience, to read this. And we identify 4 direction of travel. So the number one, it is because now the society is fully digitalized, we need to put our energy to understand the customer expectation. The number two, it is to update it, our mathematical model on this new normal, because keep in mind that before it was not necessarily the case. Now we are in a new normal, so we need to integrate this new pattern. Number three, and this is probably related to your big data questions, we need to be sure that every organization have the system, the technology, the data landscape, and platform to address this amount of data that are emerging, like a tsunami during the post-COVID-19. And finally, is the culture of any kind of organization need to change in order to be sure that we can work remote, and that we're sure that we have a data-driven approach, leveraging the multidisciplinarity of teams. So the short answer is yes, and we're accelerating this process of thinking and working.
Okay, that's interesting. And on the topic of multidisciplinarity of the teams, and of the talent, a lot of the people watching are students. And so as we are coming up onto the end of the session, I'd love for you to share your thoughts on joining a firm like Quantum Black versus joining, I guess, something that's more of a startup versus joining, a huger, sort of tech type. Like, what are your thoughts on the scale and the types of career paths you can find, and the advice you'd give to students?
So, Serena, that's another good question. I'm not here to make any kind of judgment in career. What is important for me is to pass the following message. I invite every student to do what they like. And every kind of career path or initial job have some pros and cons. Okay? But more importantly, you need to, when you make such a decision, you need to discern, and you need to think carefully. You need to engage with probably senior people who have more experience that will help you to identify the pros and cons of any kind of situation. If you go into a startup, if you go into Quantum Black, or if you go into a giant tech, or if you go into an organization that accelerating its digitalization path. But I can talk about Quantum Black. So as a personal view. So first of all, in Quantum Black, as I said, you have the opportunity to work with so many problems, so many industry. So in 2 years, you will have a chance to do probably 6-7 projects, depending the duration of a project. You will have a chance to tackle and apply the latest methodology that we identify in academic conferences, such as ICML, such as NERITS. And you will have a chance to work with talented people. I'm frankly honored and I have a privilege to work with such talented a group of data scientists, literally, because everybody brings something to the table based on their background, based on their experience, based on their research. So that's quite amazing. And as I said initially, you will have access to some McKinsey training that they are quite unique, have been developed during the last 90 years. So the combination of leadership, communication, project diversity, combined with technical excellence and R&D and innovation, as I said, transparency, ethic, explainability, fairness, will provide you a full, complete spectrum of skill when you will work with us after 3-4 years. So that's the pro and the way to see and to help our data scientists to grow. You know, there is a Latin expression that I like, is magis, is the more, is the plus. So we definitely implement the magis at Quantum Black. Serena, I don't...
My apologies. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Am I audible now? My
yes,
connection is just doing some exciting things to me. Sorry about that. Okay, well, I think a lot of people are definitely happy to hear about Magis. They, increased their Latin vocabulary for today. And they'll definitely be happy to hear the message that I heard in the beginning of do what you like. So hopefully a lot of people will, enjoy this culture that you seem to have around yourself, and will hopefully aim to work at Quantum Black one day, or just look forward to the exciting things you do. And if we're lucky, we'll be able to hear more from you at UCL FinTech over the academic year. We hope to see you again. Thank you so much for being here, Didier.
Serena, thank you so much. It looks like that we had some connection issue at the end, but it was a real pleasure. Thank you very much for the invite. And I invite again the audience to contact us. We are hiring, and we're looking forward to have a chat with you guys. Everyone, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for being here. So that was Didier. As you heard, feel free to check out their website. They're clearly hiring. And so I'd love to thank Gigi Vela, as well as Diane, Barry, and Imam Hoque, who are the speakers for today, as well as all of the other speakers who we had in previous webinars. This is our last installment. So this is as we wrap up the full month of webinars that we've had here. So a huge thank you to all the speakers, and a huge thank you to the VP of Marketing, who we had Maria, who's done an amazing job with the marketing, and the current chairwoman, Olivia, who's done an amazing job working on the behind the scenes. So we're really grateful to everyone who's been watching and keeping up, whether you've been watching them live or catching up later. We're really, really happy to have been able to hopefully teach you something new. My connection is not doing great, so I'll wrap it up here. But thank you so much, everyone, and I hope to see you during the upcoming academic year.